All right, guys. Hey, before we turn this recording stuff on, I just got to caution Hayden. He is stepping back into a hornet's nest in the office today. Him and Dylan both. He and Dylan and Brittany were all gone last week to the Lions conference in St. Louis. Katie was gone on vacation most of the week, which left Taylor and Hannah and Jack all alone, as well as Larry, Zach, and myself. So good luck to you this week, Hayden, because you know what? You are going to get killed by the people that you left behind last week while you were off gallivanting in St. Louis.
You know, I've thought a lot about this, and
because you had plenty of time to think about it while you were gallivanting in St. Louis.
But all that being said, that is the most endearing, poetic way you could let me know you missed me, Carl. Like, wow, that was so thoughtfully worded that I am a bit choked up.
Well, first of all, the fact that that's what you took from all of that really makes me question your ability to understand the English language, because I believe I just said you were screwing off in St. Louis while the rest of us were stuck back here working. I believe that's what I said.
I'm speechless.
We should start the show.
No, not yet. By the way, Heiser had to cover a football game.
I did.
We're
on
in
Friday
bad
night.
shape if that
I
happens.
had to video a football podcast on
right.
Wednesday. I had to cover a football game Friday. And Larry wants to hire me as a sports reporter now.
Yeah. Well, that's because you can be
and
counted
I had to take
on.
pictures at the Mansfield Playhouse.
Yeah, that's because you can be counted on to do your job and not just up and leave to go gallivanting.
It's good to get a little
Louis.
taste of what each other does every once in a while.
Yeah, well, it personally didn't bother me. I was just cruising along through the week, but we have so many new young reporters that you guys just abandoned. You know, Taylor, Hannah, Jack just left to their own devices because you guys just had to go off gallivanting. Did I say that already?
They were
in St. Louis.
Yeah, they were going to the Budweiser factory, Cardinals games, and then there's like a conference in there somewhere.
Yeah, well, no, they tried to sneak one in. But I will say, as a Cardinal fan, I was delighted that the game they went to is the lowest attended game in the history of that particular franchise in that particular stadium, Busch Stadium.
The new Busch Stadium?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like 17,000. I mean,
it was low.
Yeah. I mean, the Cardinals have stunk all year, but they're still going to attract. The attendance is over 2 million. But the fact
that
that
particular night was not it.
I was just thrilled that you guys who bailed on these young reporters and Zach and Larry for the entire week went to see a game. Who'd they play that night? So you can't remember that. It's because you drank too many beers, too many Budweisers.
No, they played the Athletics.
Okay, yeah, that's a terrible game.
It was not a good matchup.
Terrible
But the
game.
Athletics were used to playing in front of crowd. It was probably a big crowd for them.
Yeah, that was a big night.
I just wanted to point out that to you, Hayden, that you need to really put on your shields.
I will lock in.
Yeah, because you're going to be taking a whole bunch of crap when Larry
Hornet's
gets here
nest,
today.
he said.
I'll lock in.
Yeah, it's a hornet's nest. You're going to get stung.
Can we start the show?
All right, let's start the show. 3, 2, 1. Well, greetings and salutations, and welcome once again to the Newsman Weekly Podcast. See how my voice changes right there? Episode number 64 for those scoring along at home. Along at home, yes. We have another great show for you today. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Ohio State University Mansfield professor Tim Berra. Tim has a new book out there called The Peopling of Polynesia, which Zach is very interested in, and he's also a lover of good bourbon, which is probably what attracted my eye as much. That's going to be a fascinating conversation. Hey, many thanks to local country singer Luke Watson for writing and singing Smoke and Drink. This show's fitting theme song, and certainly something Hayden experienced while he was off gallivanting in St. Louis last week. We'll talk more about that, I hope. My thanks also to the great folks at Relax It's Just Coffee for sponsoring this show and being such a great partner to the Newsman Weekly. Every day just starts better with great coffee, and our friend Paul Kimmerling and his baristas at Relax simply have the best in town at 105 North Main Street in downtown Mansfield. Guys, I know you're both excited. NFL football is back. Heiser, your Browns hosted the Bengals. Hayden, your Steelers, and new quarterback Aaron Rodgers were at MetLife Stadium to take on the New York Jets. So, in the tradition that is the NFL, give me your biggest overreactions to Week 1 regarding your teams.
We sure we don't want to just talk high school football?
No, let's just jump right in. I need the biggest overreaction.
Okay, well, I'm not going to give you what you think you're going to get. You're going to get this everywhere. Screw these headphones. You're going to get
You can't say that on the air.
You're going to get people complaining, oh, the Browns are cursed, we lost. And yes, that is all true. But they played. I watched the second half of the game. I was at my daughter's soccer game, being a good dad and a supportive
Did they
soccer
win?
Double
dad.
duty.
Did she win?
They tied 5-5.
Oh.
But it was her first game against the older age kids, so I was really proud of her.
They have ties in soccer?
Yeah, they don't even keep score, but
okay.
a few of us keep
Those
score.
of us that care, yeah.
They're keeping stats, time of possession.
I would, but
shots
some of
on
the kids
goal.
have the same number. So
Do you realize they have 8 more corner kicks than we do? Even though a corner kick at that age level is like
they do corner kicks.
but you actually kick the ball.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
All right, good.
But anyway,
I was watching my granddaughter Saturday morning. So
here's my overreaction: the Bengals suck, the Steelers suck, the Ravens suck. The Browns look pretty good. Ravens lost. Steelers barely beat the horrible Jets in a Aaron Rodgers revenge game. The Bengals couldn't. 7 yards of total offense in the second half. They're not going to win many games if they play like that. Like, I'm sorry, I know the Browns are trash. We all know that. Everybody knew that. They had the longest odds to do anything this year. But they played all right. They hung with them. It could have been a fun day, but of course we don't have a kicker, and our receivers suck. And I don't even blame the kicker, because it's like he was the replacement for our kicker who got cut in the preseason. So, like, that's on the front office. You didn't think about getting a backup option at kicker for the last 9 months?
Yeah, I should have made a mistake with the Browns yesterday and started Njoku on my fantasy team, and that was almost cost me the game, but thank God for who's the quarterback for the Bills? Oh, no, for
Josh
the Bills.
Allen.
Oh,
Josh
thank God
Allen.
for Josh
Yeah.
Allen. Yeah. Anyway, Hayden, your biggest overreaction, and why aren't you wearing?
I know.
I will bring you my Aaron Rodgers Packers jersey. You can start wearing it.
You should.
Yeah.
I won't take as much time because I know we don't have as many Steeler fans. Probably should leave more room for Browns
Just
grieving.
you and Jack.
Yes.
There's a lot.
I've been transparent, hopefully from the jump, about how skeptical I was about taking on your Aaron Rodgers that was once with the Packers.
How do you like me now?
So I'll just maintain that same note, and I'll say my biggest overreaction is that we're going to do absolutely just fine with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, because I haven't been the biggest, fan or person that thought he was just going to take us to the promised land. So
when you were watching the game, I mean, how many times did you jump to your feet and chanting "Aaron, Aaron, Aaron"?
do the old he used to do the trophy across the belly.
The belt, yeah.
Brew up a little ayahuasca for your game day snacks.
Aaron needs a few more
chips
wins
and ayahuasca
before you start doing that.
Were you waving your terrible towel?
I did have it down.
Yeah.
I'll admit.
Now I will admit, when I watched the beginning of that game, and I think it was the first time Rodgers went back to pass and he got sacked. I said, "Oh, this is gonna be a long day for Aaron." So.
I said, "Here we go!" As soon as he got that first sack, because I'm like, "This is not good."
Because Aaron's not a rookie, and he knows when there's no chance.
Yeah.
Just go down. And I'm like, there's the Aaron that I learned to grow and dislike by the time he left Green Bay, but. Hey, anyway, my beloved Packers hosted the Detroit Lions, and I'm accurate when I say mine. I've owned one share of Packers stock since 1997, since before you guys were born. After watching Green Bay's home opener against Detroit, last year's number 1 seed in the NFC, the highest scoring team in the NFL last year.
That was last year, relax.
Yeah, but I'm just saying. It is clear to me, and this is my overreaction, it's clear to me the Packers are the best team in the NFC North, perhaps in the NFC, and maybe in the entire NFL.
Maybe.
And it's all because of one, Micah Parsons.
Yeah.
That
guy.
Like
their defense looked pretty good.
Well, I mean, they had a good defense last year.
You got a sack, right?
Yeah. Well, not only did he get a sack, but if you watch he played less than half the snaps. He had like 7 quarterback pressures. Probably 2 or 3 other sacks were set up because every time Micah was on the field, 3 different Detroit offensive linemen were pointing at him. So they're blocking him while everybody else is raising hell. But, yeah, him running, what's his name? Who's the Lions quarterback?
Jared Goff.
Yeah. Who's not the fastest guy in the world.
No.
But watching Parsons track him down for that sack, it's like a heat-seeking missile. And I'm thinking to myself, how does Goff not hear him coming? Throw the ball out of bounds. He chased him from the hash mark all the way to the sideline. Either he's really light on his feet or Goff's deaf. Because I'm screaming, I'm thinking, there's no way he's going to get a sack. He's going to throw it away. But no, then he eats it on the sideline. All right, so those NFL overreactions for the weekend. We'll try to do that every Monday morning. We'll get overreactions, and by week 8, Heiser will be completely despondent.
Yeah, it's not going to take many more weeks for me to be like, well, I don't know. When do the Cavs start?
All right, we got a lot to do today, so let's dive in. Let's talk about some recent local news before our visitor gets here. Convicted wife killer John Boyle had his parole denied again by the state of Ohio. That means the former Mansfield osteopathic physician, now 82 years old, is going to remain behind bars for at least 5 more years. Boyle was convicted in June of 1990 for murdering his wife, Noreen, put her body in his Range Rover, drove it all the way to a new house he was buying in Erie, Pennsylvania, wrapped in a tarp. He used a jackhammer that he rented to dig a hole in the basement. He put her body inside that hole. He put new concrete in over top of that hole, then put indoor-outdoor carpeting over it, and then put a shelving unit across it. Really thought he was going to get away with the murder of the century because he would forever have control of the body. But he was mistaken. Mansfield police, led by Lieutenant Dave Messmore, were able to solve that crime.
You were editing, right, at this time with the News Journal?
I was a reporter at the News Journal.
Okay.
I had been hired in January, just about the time all of this began. I was actually the health reporter. They went out and found the unhealthiest guy they could find
that's right.
to be the health reporter. But it dawned on them early on that I might be able to do some other stuff as well. So, Boyle was found guilty by a jury after a month-long trial, one of the most sensational in Richland County history. The trial included testimony against the former doctor by his own son, Collier, who was then just 12 years old. I did help cover Boyle's trial as a reporter at the News Journal. I would never have imagined 35 years later that I would still be writing about John Boyle. But I did the piece last week on Friday, my day off, which... Hayden, don't worry about it. I got you covered on my day off as well. But there we were. John Boyle's parole rejected for at least 5 more years.
5 more years. 5 more years, you'll be doing another story.
Okay,
That's a weird laugh.
I didn't like that. Ominous.
Go with that theory. Hey, the FBI was in Mansfield last week. Agents were at a hotel on North Trimble Road, but the federal agency was mum when we asked them what the agents were doing there. And I don't know how you pronounce her name, but I'll just say it. Susan Lacati, the public affairs officer for the U.S. Department of Justice in Cleveland, was polite but not overly helpful. I sent her an email. I left a voicemail. She then sent me an email back that said, quote, I can confirm the FBI was conducting court-authorized law enforcement activity in the area of Trimble Road, Mansfield, earlier today, and there's no threat to public safety. As in any given matter, if charges are filed, they will eventually become a matter of public record. So I emailed her back, and I said, hey, court-authorized law enforcement. So were you executing a search warrant? And can you say anything else? How many agents were there? What time were you there? And the email came back, I can make no further comment on this matter.
Thank you for your time.
See, Carl, while I was busy, probably, I don't know, having a drink or something on Friday.
Drink or 9?
It put a big smile. I had to laugh because when I could just hear you saying that out loud the way you wrote it, that she was kind but not overly helpful. So see, I was reading.
So why so hush-hush on the FBI? Is the FBI normally like that, or is this out of the ordinary for them? I mean, if it was like prostitution or drugs or something, wouldn't they just say that?
Normally, the FBI, anytime you're involving the feds, they're a little more secretive than local law enforcement, simply because they don't have to respond. They don't, there's no politicians in charge of the FBI. They don't care.
Right.
I've had
no voters either.
And no voters. I've had various success over the years, and I don't know what they were doing. I assume it's no heinous investigation at this point because I would have thought they said something, but it got out, so we did a story, and reader did ask, hey, why were the FBI there? So we did a story, and a lot of people read it. So, hey, let's talk about something Hayden did do this week, at least last week, in terms of work. Yep. There was a bomb threat Saturday morning, but it did not deter revelers from supporting the annual Greek Festival in Mansfield. Mansfield Police Chief Jason Bauman told Hayden that Saints Constantine and Helen Greek Orthodox Church got a text message Saturday morning around 10:30 from an unknown person claiming that a bomb had been placed in the ceiling of the church. This prompted church and festival officials as well as volunteers to evacuate the building. Hayden, you were out covering the Greek festival on Saturday. What else can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So really wasn't a ton of additional storyline or detail beyond that, but yeah, they did an initial search of the building around 10:30, or shortly after that, the building, when the church had received that text, and then they called in just for procedure, they called in the Ashland County Sheriff's Department bomb squad because I believe they serve our county as well as a few others with their bomb team, and they came through and did a thorough sweep, and Mansfield PD did one more kind of walkthrough, and yeah, it was a slight delay, probably about 2 hours, but determined it was safe to open it up and let folks get back in and enjoy some food and fun. So I spoke with Father Mark Ellis down there, and he kind of was able to make light of it and say that, it was probably the safest place in Mansfield to be at that time after all of the searching through the church and the ceiling and under everything and inside everything. So went off without a hitch the rest of the day. So just another unfortunate prankster, probably.
Yeah, people who call in bomb threats, first of all, they should all be caught, arrested, and jailed. But the really good part about
that is publicly shame them, too. There needs to be like a public shaming.
Public shaming, I like that. Be like the scene from Game of Thrones.
Yep.
Shame.
Yep. Make them walk down Main Street through all the construction barefoot.
Well, no, then they'd be crippled.
Well,
can't do that.
That's fine.
Well, and as far as I know, I mean, it might be something we follow up on. Mansfield police are still going to investigate the incident. I don't know how fruitful it always is trying to track down a fake text from a number, but it's still, for all things considered, is still under investigation.
And the good news is 99.99999% of people who contact bomb threats are jokes, and they're just doing it to be mean. So
maybe they could get the FBI's help while they're in town with that number.
Yeah, well, if they were in town, actually, okay,
they were in town.
They were in town.
That. Okay.
They were all having coffee at the McDonald's.
I was gonna say it's our. Hey, you guys need anything while we're here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll come over. No, I would have helped you with that story, Hayden, on Saturday, but I was busy.
You were a little busy.
I was busy recovering from a raucous Friday night opening of Moon Over Buffalo at the Mansfield Playhouse.
Congrats.
That was
a lot of laughs.
Audience seemed to love it. Lots of laughs,
Good.
Especially during a scene where a fellow actor is helping get my trousers back on in the second act. That got rave reviews from the audience. So
it does get spicy, just from what the tech week that I took pictures of.
Great photos.
Well, I know both of you will come to see it either Friday night, Saturday night, or Sunday afternoon. This weekend coming up. So I look forward to your attendance and your laughter coming out of the audience. But you know what? That's enough for now. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Ohio State University professor Tim Berra, an author with an interesting new book, The Peopling of Polynesia, and a noted bourbon expert. I think that's a wonderful dichotomy to explore. That's going to be a great conversation, so please stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Newsman Weekly. Joining us now is Tim Berra, OSU professor, author, and bourbon connoisseur. Good morning, Tim. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for getting up so damn early.
Well, it's not early for me. I'm always up at this time, getting ready to go and do things, working on my computer and so forth before I go to the office.
What time do you get up?
I get up at 6:52.
Okay. So that's pretty good. Hunnell's got you beat.
My wife goes to work early every morning, so I'm up at 4:40.
Oh.
I don't know why, but she insists that when she gets up, I have to get up. So
it's almost lunch for him.
That really is
kind of barbaric.
Well, Hannah barbaric, but anyway, Tim is a professor emeritus of evolution, ecology, and organismal biology, and I'll probably mispronounce that because I didn't go to the Ohio State University. I went to the Ohio University down in Athens. But
when I get introduced at lectures, people stumble over that and they want to say orgasmic.
Orgasmic.
That's even better.
Orgasmic biology. I like that. He did get a PhD in biology from Tulane University in 1969 and is a 3-time recipient of Fulbright fellowships to Australia in 69, 79, and 2009. Taught at the University of Papua New Guinea before joining the faculty of Ohio State in 72. Over the last 50 years, has spent more than 11 years doing field work in Australia. I love Australia. I'd like to go sometime, but it's a long way from here.
Well, it's a long trip to enjoy also. There's so much to do when you get there that, you need to stay not just a week or two. You should stay a month at minimum and travel around.
Now, your bio says that you got the PhD in biology from Tulane. That seems like a good place to start. What got you interested in the topics of evolution, ecology, biology, and ultimately studying ancient people?
Oh, it's all related. I mean, as a kid, I was an avid reader. I mean, I devoured books on natural history and the life of scientists and exotic places of the world. I read all that stuff growing up, always loved books. So there was never any doubt in my mind that I was going to have some kind of a scientific career that involved warm places and adventure. And I'm happy to say I've really done that. It actually happened.
Now, where did you grow up, Tim?
St. Louis.
All right, so Hayden was just in St. Louis last week, and we talked about that earlier.
Okay, well, I mean, with a name like Berra, that's sort of synonymous with St. Louis, with Yogi.
Yeah, when we were talking last week, I actually joked with Heiser. I said, Berra. I said, I got to ask him, is he related to Yogi? I didn't know you were from St. Louis.
Yeah, well, he is.
Okay.
And in fact, in my bourbon book, I mentioned the fact that my dad and my uncles and Yogi and Joe Garagiola all grew up together in the Italian section of St. Louis, known as the Hill.
Yes.
And I remember the parties of, Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter was always at my Uncle Skip's house on the Hill. And everybody would be there with piles of ravioli and turkey and ham, and the eating and the stories in Italian and the jokes would go on all night. Even the Archbishop of St. Louis would pop in, have a drink, tell some more stories, and it went on, and you could watch the turkey. The carcass would all be eaten, all the bones, absolutely bloody everything. And those were some of the greatest childhood memories you could have. And somewhere in there, Yogi is a cousin. Yogi's father and my grandfather came from northern Italy, a little village called Inveruno, north of Milan, up by the Swiss-French border. And they came about the same time to St. Louis, and, they all interacted and grew up. And so Yogi's house was on Elizabeth Street, right across from Joe Garagiola's house. And as a kid, my dad would, we'd always be on the Hill for visits with Uncle, and we'd go over and talk to Joe. And Yogi was, of course, usually off playing ball somewhere. But we just had wonderful times. And Joe played for the Cardinals, so he would leave tickets at what was then Sportsman's Park before Busch Stadium. And so Dad and I would go to a press box and get these tickets, and sometimes I'd take my little buddies and we'd sit right behind the dugout, and Joe'd come out and chat with us, when he was in the bat. So, St. Louis is the home, and I'll be a Cardinals fan forever.
Wow.
Well, you know what?
Forget the Polynesian people. We're just going to talk baseball.
Yeah, when I was a kid growing up in South Georgia in the 60s, we did not have any professional sports. I mean, it was Atlanta.
Still don't, some would
thank
say.
you. But Atlanta was so far away from Brunswick and Albany, they might as well have been New York Yankees.
Yeah,
so at night, I had a little transistor radio, and I could get KMOX.
Oh,
50,000.
Voice of St. Louis.
Yes, and I would put that under my pillow so my parents didn't know I was not going to sleep, and I would listen to Harry Carey and Jack Buck call the Cardinal games.
Yes.
I mean, Bob Gibson and Lou Brock and Kurt Flood, those were my idols growing up.
That's my team, Stan Musial.
Yes,
I have a Musial jersey, but I never get a chance to wear it these days.
Well, you should have worn it today.
I wore my Polynesian shirt.
That's true. Well, that was before you knew we were going to spend the hour talking Cardinals baseball.
Well, like I said, there'll be no dead air time with me.
That's true.
And for those younger folks out there who don't know, Yogi Berra was the greatest catcher of all time. He won 10 World Series titles when he played for the Yankees.
Evil Empire.
Joe Garagiola, who did grow up in that same neighborhood, was not nearly as good as a player, but he was a great announcer. So a lot of folks don't remember the impact that Joe Garagiola had as a baseball announcer.
And the Today Show host,
right.
And he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame as an announcer, not as a player.
Well, but we're really not here to talk about baseball.
So. Okay, fine.
But one of the things I wondered was, like, you've been doing this, evolution, ecology, and your fields of study you've been a scientist for a long time, and I think just from the brief kind of looking into some of the studies of ancient people and the evolution of the human race, like, so much has changed and so many new discoveries from when you got your PhD in 1969 to today. So can you, just for the people out there, just outline maybe a couple of the biggest, like, maybe you thought this in the 70s or 80s, but actually the research shows, like, what are some of the major changes in the field over the last 20, 30, 40 years?
Well, I mean, I could mention a bunch of things.
Yeah.
I think in terms of what I do, I'm a taxonomist, ecologist, evolutionary biologist, mainly work with fish. That's my specialty. I'm an ichthyologist. And I was trained at Tulane by one of the greatest ichthyologists in the country, Royal D. Sutkus, and the museum at Tulane. We had the fourth largest fish collection in the country with millions of specimens that Sutkus and his students all built up over the years. And I was trained in the old-fashioned naturalist tradition, like Darwin, really. I was sort of the last of the Darwinian-era trained biologists. And since then, there's been all this molecular development.
Okay.
And a lot of people today who are doing systematics are doing genetics rather than the descriptive kind of taxonomy that I would do. I'd get the fish and measure all the parameters. What's the proportion of the jaw to the head length? What's the proportion of the head to the body length? How many fin rays? How many scales along the lateral line? That's the sort of thing I would do, and I'd spend a lot of time in the field collecting the stuff and learning about where they lived. Were they on a sandy bottom or a rocky bottom? All this was the way I was trained, and I was trained that you work all the time. There is no weekend or days off or nighttime border. You just keep doing it until you get the job done. Today, students, graduate students is studying ichthyology are learning all these molecular techniques. So you get the fish and you grind them up and you look at the DNA or you look at the proteins. I'm not sure some of these people would even be able to tell a minnow from a darter because they look at the biochemistry. But you learn terrific information from that, such as it's not possible that this group of individuals would have interbred with that group of individuals because of their genes. Yet when I look at them in both of my hands, I'd say, well, they're the same species. But in fact, genetically, they are isolated. A good example of that is a study I did in New Zealand. I collected in every river system of South Island. And I was after this one species, Galaxias vulgaris. Vulgar means common. So it's a common galaxid in Australia. Collected in all these rivers, thousands of specimens, and I gave them to my colleagues who I was working with who were molecular taxonomists. They ended up showing that all the Galaxias vulgaris that I collected, in effect, could be divided up into 5 separate species that were genetically isolated from each other. But I could hardly tell them apart when I held them in my hand. See, that is probably one of the most profound changes in my particular specialty that I did.
Was it hard to trust the data at first?
You mean the molecular
Yeah,
data?
like
Yes.
yeah.
I remember as a graduate student when we'd have speakers coming into Tulane who were just developing these techniques. And I remember asking a question once because the speaker called me out and said, "Gee, that is a very thoughtful question." Here I was a graduate student. I thought, my professors will hear that I'm thoughtful. Little did they know. But I said, well, when we measured these specimens and that, we get the same idea as Darwin. There's variation in nature. Everything varies one way or another. How do you know these molecules aren't varying? And they do.
You mentioned that was in New Zealand. We've talked about your travels a little bit and living abroad, teaching in Papua New Guinea. You've done research in Australia. Tell us a little bit about your travels and what's your favorite place and why?
Oh, well, I mean,
it's probably hard to pick.
Yeah, it's like asking me my favorite bourbon or my favorite fish or my favorite book. There's no single answer to that. But my year in Papua New Guinea was extraordinary. I mean, I was on the Fulbright in Australia for like a year and a half, close to 2 years, and this job opened up at the University of Papua New Guinea, the big island just north of Australia. And I thought, geez, I'm on such an adventure here with a year and a half in Oz. Why do I want to go home yet? So I took the job in Papua New Guinea.
And what year was this?
1971.
Okay.
And I spent exactly 365 days in Papua New Guinea. I was teaching genetics and evolution and introductory biology to students that were one generation removed from the Stone Age. I mean, it was incredible. The university had just opened up, and it was the country, Papua New Guinea, was under Australian administration. And, there's so many experiences. I got to live, for example, only time in my life, as a racial minority. Everybody around me was black, but they're not black like Africans. They're black Melanesians.
Yeah.
They look totally different. They were as different from black Africans as I am from them or from either group. And so that was interesting. Plus, their culture was so bloody different than the Australian American English culture that I was part of and representing. So that was just a wonderful experience, and all kinds of adventures traveling around in remote areas and so forth.
Was there, what was your, transportation like? Did you?
Well, there were no
the
roads.
day-to-day?
You couldn't drive anywhere.
Okay.
There were only a few streets in Port Moresby, where I live, the big town of New Guinea. Anybody from World War II knows about Port Moresby. But you couldn't then get out of Port Moresby unless you flew to Lae or Goroko or somewhere else. I had a little car that I bought brand new when I arrived. It was a Mitsubishi two-stroke. I mean, I had to add oil to the petrol, and it left this little blue cloud, and it sounded like a lawnmower. And I was driving this thing around. Man, I thought that was cool. And, of course, I had to sell it when I left. That was my transportation, but there were no buses or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I was cautioned. The first day of arrival, the dean brought me into his office and says, "Now, this is like no other place you've ever lived, and there's some things to know and so forth. That if you happen to hit a local person, don't stop to administer first aid or anything, because the people will come out of the bush and hack you to death. Don't do that."
That got my attention.
So you said drive to the police station and report it. And there were lots of fights and killings. And even today, the State Department does not recommend that you go to Papua New Guinea, but people do go, and it's not horrible. We did travel around, and we were threatened a few times with spears as we drove in Goroko, the north of the mountains. You had to fly to get there, and a local school gave us their bus to drive around, and they'd stand on the side and threaten us with spears. We had a break-in in our house while we were in there. That was interesting. I heard breaking glass in the kitchen and got up, and here's this native guy coming in the kitchen window.
Oh.
Ooh, yeah, what do I do? So I grabbed him, and he was all greased up with pig fat. I couldn't hold him. You know, he squirted right out of my arms. It was amazing. And he opened the door and then ran out, and then came back around the front and threw this kind of mid-sized boulder rock through the dining room window or bedroom window, landed in the bed next to my wife. That brought another scream.
Yeah.
And, such is life in New Guinea.
Such is life, yeah.
And, I can go on and on.
New Guinea, it's obviously a high indigenous population. Is it still very much this tension between 21st century civilization and indigenous ways of life?
Well, yes, but in a different way, because since we opened the university, and I was there for the first graduation, there were 7 locals that graduated, and they went right into the civil service. And one of the calls while I was there is that localize the government. Let's move these Australians mostly and Americans out of the country and let the locals take over. And that was a movement, and finally it happened. So yeah, it's all an independent country run by the local people. We had trouble getting girls to go to the university, because if the girls got educated out of the villages, they were not nearly worth the bride price they would bring otherwise. We don't want these educated, uppity girls. We want, real girls.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't get 200 gold lip pearl shells and 5 pigs for a bride anymore. They were educated.
Now, I know you're a research associate at Western Australia Museum in Perth, and I know you did some work with the megamouth shark. And I want to ask you about a megamouth shark, what your experiences there were. But we're also, this is the 50th anniversary of the release of the movie Jaws.
Oh, yeah.
Which was actually, even though I grew up kind of on the ocean, I didn't know what big sharks were. What were your thoughts when Jaws came out, how that impacted people who care about sharks and research fish? And then tell us about that megamouth.
Okay, there's a lot in there. Well, like everybody, I love the movie. It was just terrific. And the mechanical shark and
Bruce,
Bruce,
the mechanical shark.
yeah. And there's a Monty Python skit where everybody is named Bruce.
Yes.
Okay.
You and I are the only ones that know Monty Python either. So.
Show me a few.
Anyway, the movie was terrific, but it was obvious that this was not going to be good for the sharks. And people wanted to, why do we want these things? Let's kill every shark. And sharks are really generally around the world in big trouble because they're fished for their fins. And large live sharks will be taken out of the ocean, fins sliced off while they're alive, and they're thrown back in, and they thrash around and flounder and die, simply to make shark fin soup, which is a big deal in the Orient. Sharks are endangered all around, everywhere, all species. And it was not good for sharks. But that did bring attention to their existence, and there's hundreds of species, and each one is got its own interesting story. Now the megamouth thing is really cool because, most people don't know about it. In 1976, a specimen got caught in a Navy sea anchor in Honolulu, Pearl Harbor area. And this thing was cranked up, and holy cow, nobody knew what it was. Eventually, it took 8 years to get the species description out. And that's a whole nother story, and I can tell you about one of the neatest practical jokes ever played among scientists. But I don't know if we'll have time for that. Anyway, it took 8 years to get the species description out. That was 76. A couple years after that, might have been 78, something like that, a second specimen was caught in a fishing net off the coast of California. The original description had not yet come out. Eventually, the species description comes out, and it's not only a new species of shark, it's a new genus of shark and a new family of shark. A new family is a major discovery. Nobody had ever seen anything like this. These specimens were 15 feet long, the size of a bus, the weight of a Volkswagen. How could we have not known about this thing? It was the first one ever to turn up. And then one day I was in Perth. I was working there as a research associate at the museum, studying this little thing called the salamander fish. Salamander fish is maybe 2 inches long at best. The scientific name, Lepidogalaxia salamandroides, is bigger than the fish. when you type out the name, you lay the fish on it, the fish doesn't reach the end of its name. So I was working on that, and this little fish is bizarre. It lives in pools the size of this room, this little studio we're in. The water evaporates during the summer. Where are the fish? Fish have to have water. Well, he suspected they might be down in the sand or something. So I brought a fire truck into the field with me, getting creative, and released 2,700 liters of water. And I thought, okay, I'm going to drag a net and call this time 0 and see how long it takes to find fish. Well, I caught fish the first second. Instant fish, just add water. They were right under the sand. So after that, we started digging in dry pools and sifting the sand, and we found them sitting on the water table. Okay, so I was there studying this 2-inch fish. We get a call at the museum and say, hey, this big black whale-like thing is washed up on the beach about 50 miles south of Perth in the little vacation town of Mandurah. And they said, do you want it? And we said, well, what is it? And they said, well, we don't know. And we think it's some kind of whale. Well, okay, we'll go down and take a look at it. And we knew it was a megamouth shark most people wouldn't, but being ichthyologists and taxonomists and shark people, we recognize this is, my goodness, the third known specimen of megamouth shark.
Wow.
So now what? How do I move a 15-foot, 1,500-pound specimen? Because everything I work with, like salamander fish and other things, they fit neatly in a half-gallon jar of farmland. I can't just pick it up and plop it in. This thing is 15 feet long. Now what? So we kind of made all this up on the spur of the moment. The curator of fishes, a good friend of mine that I was working with, he was off in New Guinea, some remote area, seining rivers and lakes. The other fish curator was on long service leave, and here I was, the research associate visiting there, so I got to do a lot of this stuff. We decided we had to get it back to Perth. We weren't sure how we were going to pickle it yet. We ultimately got it on a flatbed truck. We had to get a forklift on the beach to lift this thing, put it on the flatbed truck, quickly drove it back to Perth, called up frozen fish companies and borrowed their big freezer and put this truck in it. And it produced such an outcrying of interest in Perth that people were calling the museum every 30 seconds. When can we see this? When can we see it? And we thought, we better put it on display. So we took the frozen specimen, put it in a shaded courtyard of the museum, and 6,000 people filed by it in one day. Then we put it back in the freezer, and how are we going to pickle this thing? And we got our heads together, and we decided, well, we don't have a container that big, so we dug a hole in museum property outside of town, sandy soil. We lined it with swimming pool liner to make it waterproof. We filled it with water, and then we took the frozen specimen out there and put it in the water. And of course, it's going to float while it's frozen. So days later, we go out and check on it. It's sitting on the bottom because it had defrosted and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I had to pump all the water out. Then we had to pickle it. Well, I'm used to throwing the fish in 10% farmland. How do you pickle something this big? We developed a hypodermic based on a pressurized garden sprayer and made a needle out of a meter-long piece of stainless steel tubing and sharpened the edge. And we used 8 44-gallon drums of formalin to inject this thing until formalin was coming out of the holes from the previous injection. Then we dumped the rest of the barrels into the hole and added water from a fire hydrant and hoped we arrived somewhere near a 10% solution. And you know that specimen stayed in that pit that we dug for 8 years.
Wow.
In perfect condition. Did not deteriorate. Of course, we made all the measurements before we pickled it. While once it had defrosted and was sitting on the bottom of the empty pool, we jumped in there and measured it. And you had to wear respirators and special clothing to do with all this formalin and so forth. So we did all that, and it came time to bury it or cover it. I had no budget for this, and I wasn't even an employee of the museum. I was a visitor. And I said, well, how are we going to cover this thing? We can't just leave it open because dogs and small children would fall into this vat of formalin. We got to do something. And I said, well, it's easier, and this has been an operating principle throughout academic existence, is that it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. So I took the gates off of this property and laid the gates over this hole, and then covered that with roofing insulation, and then put the sand from the hole on top of the insulation. And that's how we sealed the hole, and it was perfect.
It sounds like all of it, you're just flying by the seat of your pants.
We're making this up as we go along. And you can visit Megamouth 3, which is what we dubbed it because it was the third known specimen. You can visit Mega 3 in Perth at the Western Australian Museum to this day.
Wow.
And say hi.
That's cool.
Wow.
That's my Megamouth in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that we had time for the joke, but
Tell the joke.
Okay, the thing never got described for 8 years. And the person who found it, a well-known ichthyologist, everybody, all the other ichthyologists saying, come on, get off your duff. We want this species description. Let's do it. Well, finally, a couple of rogue ichthyologists, both of whom were good friends of mine, John McAllister, for example, California Academy of Science, he wrote a fake description, put in photos, but he did this allegedly in Japanese. And so he put all kinds of papers in Japanese literature, strung them together, and then put an English title on it, description of a new shark, and put his name on it rather than the guy who had it, and sent it as a reprint to the fellow who hadn't yet described the species. And when Leighton Taylor is his name at University of Hawaii, when he got this description, what? How can that be? How could McAllister have described my specimen? What is this? What's going on? So he couldn't read it. It was all in Japanese. He gave this to his secretary, who was a Japanese American, and she said, well, I can't make any sense out of it. This page is about architecture, and this is about bears in literature, and this is about pottery, and this makes no sense whatsoever. But as they looked at it closely, they found embedded in these Japanese characters the name of John McAllister and a couple other co-conspirators, and then they realized this was a hoax. And so he thought, I better get the species description out. And so in the official description, California Academy of Science, he says, and I thank John McAllister et al. For an early draft of this paper. So it's just one of these secrets of ichthyology that is an in-joke.
Well, to transition from sharks to Polynesia, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about your recent book that just came out, The Peopling of Polynesia. Give us a little bit of an outline of how those islands were colonized, and are there any competing models or theories to how that happened?
Well, none that are scientifically acceptable. But I got into the interest of this subject as a kid. Like I said, I was an avid reader, And the book Kon-Tiki, Thor Heyerdahl's just absolutely mesmerizing adventure story of how he builds a raft and sails from South America and ends up in the South Pacific in Polynesia. And he did that to prove his idea that it was the South Americans who populated Polynesia. Now, at the time, nobody really accepted that. He didn't get much credibility, and he was absolutely wrong in saying that. But it stimulated a lot of research. It got my interest in Polynesia and everybody else's, and it was a movie and a bestseller. It's a great book. Everybody should read it. It's one of the adventure stories of sailing the ocean. But it isn't true that Polynesia was populated from South America. So that is still a misconception that a lot of people have because they all read Kon-Tiki.
Well, that's the book that I read. I was actually going to ask you about Kon-Tiki, so I'm glad you brought it up so that now I don't have to, because Thor Heyerdahl had me convinced when I read that's where it all came from.
Right, because he did the voyage, but there are problems with that in the sense that he had to be towed 40 miles off the coast because the Humboldt current was so strong he could never have gotten out of that. But in any event, the real explanation, and this is what the book is about, and I have maps galore in the book, and the summary map really is, there's a map that's a summary of the entire book. So I'll give you that story. If we go back 5,000 years ago, some people from Taiwan left that area, South China. They and their descendants kept sailing south and south and south. That was 5,000 years ago. Their descendants got into the Philippines about 4,000 years ago. From there, they island hopped down along the coast of New Guinea. Now, New Guinea had already been populated for 40,000 years by the original out-of-Africa diaspora of our species. So New Guinea was not about to let these migrants in except as dinner. So the migrants kept going and going. They got into like the Bismarck Archipelago, the Solomon Islands by about 3,200 years ago, something like that. And within the Solomon Islands, there is a huge ocean gap, about 300 kilometers of open ocean to get to the next island. Everything to the east of that gap is uninhabited territory. There are no people in the rest of the east of that line, So they eventually get across that line, get into New Caledonia by 3,200, get into Fiji by 3,000 years ago. And that Fiji, New Caledonia, and everything I mentioned is Melanesia. From Fiji, they get to Tonga and Samoa by 2,800 years ago. Tonga and Samoa are now what we call the western part of Polynesia. Polynesia is this giant triangle of the South Pacific. If you take a line from Hawaii over to Easter Island, down to New Zealand, and back up to Hawaii, you've inscribed a gigantic triangle on the Pacific Ocean. That is Polynesia.
So Hawaii is part of Polynesia.
Hawaii is the extreme north part of Polynesia. New Zealand, extreme south part. Easter Island, the extreme eastern part. And all of this was unoccupied territory. And the interesting thing about these migrants is that they stopped in Samoa for 1,500 years. They did not go any further. During this time, the production of lapita pottery, for example, which started in the islands and left pottery sherds all along the trail, like breadcrumbs to follow, that ceases at Samoa. What goes on is called Polynesian plainware. So during this 1,500 years, these people were developing this huge ocean-going type of canoe. It's a double-hulled canoe, 70 feet long, 20 feet wide, has a little shack on it, can hold their domestic animals, their water supply, and maybe 20 people. At the same 1,500-year time period, they were working out all kinds of incredible navigation techniques. I mean, they didn't have any instruments, but they could navigate by the stars. They figured out that stars in the sun and the moon.
Which are different than the stars we look at today.
Oh,
with,
absolutely.
Like,
the Southern Cross is an important part of their navigation. They understood bird migration. A frigate bird might go 100 miles from from a nest, whereas a noddy only goes 30 miles to feed. So if you see a frigate bird up there flying around, there's an island somewhere within 100 miles or so. They looked at the underside of clouds. You can't see the islands in the distance because they're so low, but you can see a cloud above an island. And if that cloud has like a little blue patch on its belly, that is the lagoon being reflected, on the cloud, the lagoon of an island. The bioluminescence in the water, they could recognize it bouncing off of other islands and so forth. All of these things increase the footprint of the tiny little island. A 2-mile island might appear to be more of a 100-mile island because of all these things they learned. So eventually, in the Vaca Moana, these big canoes, they got to central eastern Polynesia, places that everybody thinks about, like Tahiti and the Cook Islands and the Marquesas and so forth. They reached that by about 1,100 years ago. From there, 1,000 years ago, it only took them 100 years then to get to Hawaii. By 900 years ago, they got over to Easter Island. By 800 years, they got to New Zealand. New Zealand was the last place on Earth to be occupied by humans. This is the last human diaspora. It's just an incredible story. And these people were just heroic sailors.
Right.
It's amazing what they were able to do.
This
really.
was not the SS Minnow in the
No,
Gilligan's
this is
Island.
not Gilligan's Island. I'm not sure where that was. I think it's in a studio lot in California somewhere.
Exactly. And you know what? I don't understand why they could never fix the boat. They had a scientist. Why couldn't they fix the boat, Tim? I don't understand that.
I remember the show. Another show you old guy might remember, and that was Adventures in Paradise.
Yes.
I love that show, and that's also part of my interest in Polynesia. Captain Adam Troy sailing the Tiki-2, getting into all kinds of mischief and taking interesting people around Polynesia. Someday I'm going to get there. And I did. And I wrote a book about it.
Well, speaking of shows and potentially fiction, I want to know your thoughts on, I was going to just ask about ancient civilizations. And there's this popular show on Netflix, Ancient Apocalypse. Have you come across that at all?
No, I have no knowledge of stuff like that.
Basically, in short, this guy, Graham Hancock, has this theory that after the last ice age, a lot of prehistory got wiped out. And so he's asking all kinds of questions about, things are really a lot older than, and some of it's rooted in, as we discover new species of humans and new artifacts and things that, things do keep getting kind of older, correct? We keep pushing that timeline back.
New discoveries, yes.
Yeah.
But then you have real fossils to back that up. You have
Sure.
data. Sounds like this guy's just making it up
He's
as
just
he
asking
goes
questions.
along.
But I wanted to know your thoughts on some of that, you mentioned the Kon-Tiki expedition book kind of got you interested, but it wasn't scientifically grounded at all.
Right.
Do you think there's value in that, bringing that to the public eye?
Oh, I mean, there's so many crackpot conspiracy theories about so many things. For example, something I can talk about that I know is the Moai of Easter Island. There is a book that shows the moai being moved around by space aliens, because this guy says that there couldn't have been technology for humans with no machines to do this.
Okay.
And of course he's wrong. We can move these things today the way they did them in the past as proof of concept, and this has been done. It wasn't really space aliens. So people who make these goofy claims, where are their data? I would ask for their data. The other thing is that my involvement with megamouth shark tells me that there are many things that we still do not know and understand. What other critters are in the bottom of the sea? Megamouth is a deep sea shark that washed up. What else is down there?
And so much of the ocean floor hasn't been discovered yet, right?
It's as unknown or more unknown than the surface of the moon. So, I'm willing to look at anything, but I want to see data.
Yeah.
Don't just tell me. And that's the beauty of science. It's much better to figure things out than to make things up. And that's what science does. And science is self-correcting. So in the days of Thor Heyerdahl and Kon-Tiki, he had an interesting hypothesis. This has been refuted by the data from archaeology, the trail of Lapita pottery, linguistics, the fact that the names are all similar in these different Polynesian dialects and so forth, and biology, the study of genetics, showing that the Polynesian people are a coherent group related by culture and language and genetics, and they really do not carry indicators of the genetics of Americans, of Indians from South America.
But they do carry some indicators of New Guinea.
Yes, and that's another interesting story. I mean, this is all in my book, by the way. So you need to buy the book.
Can people find it on Amazon or?
Yes, but
Okay.
I mean, people in Mansfield can get
Yeah.
it from me. I bought a bunch of boxes of this because, just like my bourbon book, people stop me at Kroger's at the liquor store and they want to know about bourbon. So I carry
no free tips.
I carry my bourbon book and the Polynesian book in boxes in my car. It's sort of like a drug dealer. I'm selling books out of the trunk of my car. But the Polynesian book, we have a special printing that was just for the launch of the book, which was Tuesday in Mansfield and Wednesday in Columbus on the main campus of OSU. So I, bought from the publisher the remaining copies of this numbered edition that I can sign. So I'd like to sell the book to the people directly and be able to sign it for them.
Yeah, that's cool.
But anyway, now what was the? I lost the train of thought.
And I don't want to take too much time because I know you got to get out of here in about 20 minutes. But we were talking about New Guinea, Papuan.
Oh yeah,
DNA
the
and how
Papuan
that-
genes.
yeah.
Well, after the migrants got to Samoa 2,800 years ago, about 500 years after that, migrants from the Bismarck Archipelago, and these are Melanesian people, went to the east and intermingled. Admixed is the genetic term we would use. They interbred with some of these Polynesians from Samoa. This then was continued on into the east. Some of these admixed people moved to the east, and that is the source of Melanesian genes in the population of Polynesians today. The gene pool of today's Polynesians has about 25% Melanesian genes from this admixture. And another interesting genetic fact is that the genotype of the original migrants from Taiwan no longer exists in Polynesia except in admixture with the Melanesian genes. So, that just shows what people do. People interbreed when they get together.
Right.
We're all one species, but we have different geographical appearances. And it's inevitable. I mean, we had the same issue with Neanderthal and anatomically modern humans. They existed at the same time in certain places like Europe. And in my evolution book way back in 1990, I postulated that the Neanderthals disappeared most likely because they were genetically swamped by modern humans. And that was sort of controversial then. Today we know from the study of genetics that there are plenty of Neanderthal. There are 2% of our gene pool is Neanderthal. We interbred with the Neanderthals, and my thought was, hey, humans, they'll breed with anything that holds still. It's just, yes.
I mean, that's certainly people in Congress are representative of the fact that there are still Neanderthals out there.
Well, that's a colossal insult to Neanderthals. Neanderthals were not the dumb, knuckle-dragging types that are portrayed in the literature or our Congress. Their brains were at least as big and in many instances larger than Homo sapiens' brains. Homo sapiens Neanderthal had a larger skull, but it was differently shaped. It was more elongate like a football. Different regions of the brain were developed and so forth. But Neanderthals had a vital culture. They buried their dead. They made artwork and had interesting tools and so forth. So they're not some low-class subhuman.
They're not the cavemen that
that's
portrayed.
Well, they were cavemen in the literal sense, but they're not
dumb cavemen.
They're not portrayed like a cartoon.
Well, kind of speaking of maybe controversies, but is there anything, whether it's in your specialty or just in your kind of all-encompassing field, is there anything that's still kind of up for debate, or there's different theories or ideas surrounding something that you hope within your lifetime facts are able to back one specific theory or concept and prove?
Oh, well, I mean,
another loaded question.
Yeah, that's such a broad, huge question. All the fields
your
of
favorite.
science.
What's the one that you're like, I really hope they come out with some data here?
Well, there's physics, chemistry, and biology. And what I would say is that everything that happens has a physical, chemical, or biological explanation for why it happens. But we don't always know that or understand it, and we're chipping away. Science makes inroads, and then it's either refuted or verified, and then it moves on from that. But it's self-correcting. So if you make a mistake, you will fix it eventually. And you get to the point where there are some things that are indisputable, like evolution, like the fact that vaccines work and are safe and effective. Yet you have crackpots trying to tell you otherwise. So, I can't answer for everything there is in science. I would like to know how many really interesting animals we do not know about. And how can you know that? Well, you can't. It just has to be uncovered. There's this new field now of de-extinction, I think they're calling it. And it's trying to bring back extinct animals.
Like the woolly mammoth?
Like the woolly mammoth, like the dodo. My favorite to bring back would be the thylacine, which is the Tasmanian wolf. It's a marsupial, but looks very much like a wolf. It was finally wiped out in 1934 in Tasmania. But the specimens we have in museums of skins and skeletons, you can retrieve DNA from that and do the DNA magic and implant that embryo that you would make into a living a carnivorous marsupial, like the Tasmanian devil, for example, and then raise up the babes maybe.
Tim, have you not seen Jurassic Park? This is a bad idea you're talking about. I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, I've seen those movies, and that is established science, that T-Rexes will come back and eat us all.
I'm not recommending T-Rex, but I am recommending thylacines because they lived as recently as 1934 with people and civilization, and they were hunted and killed by humans because they were preying on sheep which they made their living. Another good candidate in my mind is that when the Maoris, the Polynesians who got to New Zealand just 800 years ago, that would be the year 1200, when they got there, they found these gigantic flightless birds called the moas. Now, not moai like my friend here, little Eric. They were moas, which is the Polynesian word for chicken. Some of these things were 10 feet tall, weighed 500 pounds.
Terrifying.
There were 11 species. Some were only the size of turkeys. But the bottom line here is that within 200 years, every single moa was killed. The species, all 11 species, were exterminated as a food source for the humans that made it to New
They
Zealand.
probably had to hunt those things just so they didn't hunt them, the humans.
Well, I think the humans would probably get away, but I mean, ostriches can be deadly. They will disembowel you if you get close enough, and they kick with their claws.
They scare me.
So, but the moas could be brought back, I think, and that would be, I don't know, intellectually very cool. I'd love to see it
for sure.
But if I ever hear you say you want to bring back the T-Rex, we're going to...
No, I'm
no
not.
problem.
That's not my thing.
Right. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, but I did want to ask you a couple of questions about bourbon. Now, a couple of years ago, I went down to the Bourbon Trail in northern Kentucky, and one of the places we went, and I recommend these visits to everybody, is that they had a tasting. Unfortunately, it was at 9 a.m., and I don't recommend bourbon tastings at 9 a.m. if you'd like to do anything else the rest of the day. But one of the things they did is we had, like, these are the bourbons, and then they had aromatics where you smell and then you drink. And every bourbon tastes different based upon the scent that you took.
Right.
How does that work? How does a bourbon taste different based upon what I just smelled?
Well, that's why I wrote the book. All that is answered in my bourbon book. Now, bourbon by law must be stored in new charred oak containers. It gets 100% of its color from that charred oak container. It gets anywhere from 50 to 75% of its taste from the oak. Now, the chemicals in the wood, the tannins, the vanillins, and so forth, are in the wood. When the wood is toasted and charred, it makes these things more available. The alcohol sits in there in the rick house. It moves in and out of the wood depending on the temperature, depending on the position in the rick house. This is going on for years and years, and these chemicals in the wood come into the bourbon, and that's where you get the butterscotchy taste, the vanilla taste, the creme brulee taste. And if you read real professional tasters of bourbon, you're going to hear a whole wealth of things that, almost sound imaginary, like, oh, this tastes like an old English leather saddle, something like that. and they're dead serious about this. And I did some training and took courses in this before I wrote the book in order to have professional credentials, and I'm an executive bourbon steward, which is a credential offered by Moonshine University, which is a real place, by the way, in Louisville, that teaches potential distillers, tavern owners, waiters, people who want to know about bourbon. You can take this course. Anyway, one part of the training we did is we each had this box of little vials that were like you were mentioning. They were different chemical compounds. And you sniff these and you learn to recognize so that you can then, this takes practice. You don't get this in a second. It takes years of practice to be able to describe these flavors in bourbon. But that is called sensory training, and women make the best tasters because per square centimeter of their tongue and mouth, they have more sensory cells than do men. Now, in a related subject, and here you can see I'm jumping around, but everything is connected in what I do. I worked on a fish called the Australian grayling, and this was in Victoria, southeastern Australia, in the state of Victoria, but near Melbourne. So the Australian grayling, a slender little golden fish, about 8-10 inches long, beautiful looking thing. When I'd take it out of the net, you'd sniff. I said, "Gee, somebody's cutting up cucumbers for a salad," you know. And this happened over and over and over. This fish is clearly emitting this cucumber odor. So I decided, well, you know, I'm trying to work out the life cycle of the fish because nobody knew what it was. When I started, they say, "You'll never see these. We've been trying to catch them for 30 years and we think they're extinct." I got thousands of them. It's just a matter of persistence. But anyway, why did it smell like a cucumber? So I took specimens, put them in liquid nitrogen right out of the net, and took them to a food chemist in Melbourne at one of the universities. And he then took some skin, and there's techniques that you use, but basically we attached them to a gas chromatograph and a mass spectrometer to identify this molecule that was producing this scent. And the answer was just what I expected. They have this molecule 2,6-nonadienol, which is precisely what's found in cucumbers. Yeah, so there you go. And since I published that, other people have taken other fish like smelt. The name smelt gives you some clue that this thing has a smell. It sort of smells like cucumber. The same molecule, 2,6-nonadienol, is in smelt. So this casual observation went around the world in scientific publications. This is what I do. This is why I've made a 50-year career in ichthyology. I mean, who wants to work for a living when you can do this? I took early retirement way back in 1995 from teaching because I wanted to spend full time doing research. I haven't had a paycheck since. I don't get paid for being retired.
You retired to work more.
Yeah, I retired in order to work more, and I guess I'm a failure at retirement, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
We all benefit because of it. It's great stuff.
All right. Well, folks, looking at the time, we are going to have to wrap up today's show on that note. Many thanks to OSU Professor Emeritus Tim Berra for joining us today. Best of luck with the new book and your explorations of great bourbon. I appreciate you coming in today.
My pleasure.
Thanks again and we will put links in the show notes for how you can get this book and also the bourbon book and just find out more about Tim in general, and also that there are some links to that megamouth shark in Australia out of the museum. We'll put those in. And thanks again to all of you for listening to the Newsman Weekly. I'll be back in a second to put a bow on this week's show. But until then, remember what Mark Twain once said: if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything.